Welcome to the next episode of Brandland. I'm Garrett Justice, and I'm joined today by Rachael Ferranti, who's the Director of Marketing at Selling Simplified. Rachael, how are you doing today?
Hey, Garrett. I'm great. How are you?
So good. I'm very excited to talk about this topic today. But before we jump into the meat of it, why don't you give our listeners just a quick overview of your background, your career so far, and what Selling Simplified does?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background's a little all over the place. My background with Selling Simplified started 5 years ago, just about when I'd moved out to Denver from the East Coast without a job. And within a month I was here and I started as a content specialist. I was on the operations side. We were a much smaller operation at the time. We had our headquarters in Denver and an office in the UK. And I was just helping sort of create emails and write copy and set up some campaigns for our clients. And we provide business to business, B2B demand generation solutions. So I'd started there, and I think while we are a marketing company, that's what we'd be classified as, we're very tech driven. So I found myself really the only creative person just amongst a sea of really technical people. And in the time there wasn't a marketing department at the company. And so I was the go-to anytime we needed a logo or a website or anything for ourselves. And that just escalated as we grew. You know, I hired on some help, and it freed me up to focus a little bit more on corporate marketing. You know, it came to us that we would need to redo a website, and we would need to put out we would need to do some marketing for ourselves, which we hadn't done. So fortunately, I just by default was that person. So I've really learned, I really learned the operation side of this business. I was in the trenches for a while. But my role changed over the years, and about a year and a half ago, I was officially given a director of marketing title for work that I'd been doing pretty much solely marketing work for the company for about 6 months at that point. So yeah, and after that, it was really, it felt so real after that. It was like, well, here's your budget. What's your strategy? Here are the trips you're going on. Here are the clients that you're meeting, your events. So it just all of a sudden became just larger than I'd ever expected when I walked in the door, really, as almost an entry-level position.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I love it. I think that's an excellent segue into our topic today. And I just want to say too, I completely resonate with your story. And I think many out there do. I know when I joined Lucidpress, we had just launched Lucidpress, the second product that we had at the company. And it was me, a product manager, and a few engineers. So like I was the whole marketing team for a while. And then, you know, over the last 5.5 years, as we've grown, you know, now I have a team of 9 or 10. And I think that like you, there's many people out there who are in positions like that, who kind of have the background and experience, but then just kind of get thrown into something and kind of learn and learn on the fly. And so many of us are like that. So that's why I'm so excited to talk about our topic today. So when you and I were talking about this before, you kind of pitched this idea of imposter syndrome, and how do you kind of deal with and manage and conquer this feeling of imposter syndrome that so many of us have. I know I've had it in my role. I still do many times. And so I guess with that topic, tell us a little bit more. Why did you want to talk about this topic today?
Right. So I was, like I just said, I've kind of gone through the school of hard knocks in marketing rather than the traditional, if there is such a thing anymore, route of studying it in school, which I did not. This was my first marketing role. And I was approached by your team months ago, saying that they wanted the best and brightest. They were, reaching out to the best and brightest minds in marketing for a podcast, and I was just like, whatever. That is so not who I am, right? Flattered, but what would I say?
Yeah.
What do I have to say? And just a couple months went by, and I thought, I should do that. And I wonder if I can find that email still. And serendipitously, the next day, Alexis, followed up with me, and she goes, "Hey, I guess you're not interested." And I got right back to her. I was like, "Actually, I am. How do we get started? I have an idea now." The reason I wanted to talk about it is because I think that's just kind of the essence of what so many of us struggle with. I mean, I listen to quite a few marketing podcasts. I'm surrounded by people that have been in marketing at large companies globally every day. And I'm learning from them constantly. And I'm a huge proponent of autodidacticism anyway. And I love education and learning. But I find myself listening to some marketing podcasts, and I always feel like all hail the conquering CMO, regaling us with tales of these like flawless nurture tracks or these ROI driving campaigns. And while they're great opportunities, I so don't relate to that yet, right? And I think that's just something that's not talked about, and it's been an idea and a feeling that I've been kind of silently carrying around for a while because we don't really talk about it. And I just realized I couldn't be the only person in this role feeling this way. I think somebody needs to say, like, this is a difficult field. It's almost impossible to really master. It's not a science. It's kind of a combination of science and art and psychology and design all in one. And I thought that there were new and young marketers out there that just needed to hear this from somebody in the spotlight.
I love it. I appreciate the sincerity and the vulnerability here. And I think that it is a topic I completely agree with you that we need to talk about. And I love that people like you are feeling more comfortable coming forward and admitting like, hey, I don't know it all, right? Because the truth is none of us do. We're all trying to figure it out along the way. And you know what I think is also really interesting about that, Rachael? Like I've been able to tell just in the short conversations that you and I have had that you're a really humble person. But man, when you look at your LinkedIn profile with, you know, your graduating magna cum laude and your master's and, you know what I mean, your experience that you have, it is impressive. And I think a lot of us feel like, oh man, I don't know what I'm doing, but maybe from the outside, others might see us as, wow, they got it all together. They know exactly what they're doing. So it's awesome hearing someone like you who's in this role and coming forward and saying, hey, I don't have it all figured out. Like I'm still trying to figure it out too. And I think that you're absolutely right. That is comforting for probably many out there who can relate to that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for saying that. I mean, I think talking about vulnerability, I think we're just in a really good time right now, socially and culturally, that we're starting to get a little bit more comfortable talking about those things. But, you know, as I was coming in here this morning, getting ready for this, that was something that I thought about is there's no real room for brands to really be vulnerable. You know, they can, and it's something that I did want to address here. Like as brands, we can address vulnerable topics and vulnerable audiences. And I mean, we're seeing a lot of that right now these days with COVID, right? I mean, ads showing frontline workers and Nike being like, we got this. But even in those scenarios, the brand's role is to offer some sort of solution or support. Like your brand, I just feel that your brand has to be this superhero almost. And as marketers, our job is to be on display and boasting about it all the time, which at least I'd like to believe is contrary to our human nature. So in that intersection, it can feel like sometimes really exhausting and overwhelming work. But on the other hand, it almost requires this confidence in the marketers behind these brands to me that seems like sometimes superhuman and almost inauthentic and like plastic and shiny sometimes. And I hate to say that because I mean, these people are brilliant, but it's never talked about. Like we're conditioned to always be speaking to strengths and like shouting about it, right? I can't think of any channel where marketers talk purely about like insecurities and weaknesses. It's always like, if they do, it's always an anecdote on the path to success, but it's just something that we never address, like weakness and vulnerability in marketing, full stop. So I just felt like it's there and we had to.
I love it. And I think, you know, one of the things that I've been seeing, especially been doing this podcast and talking to lots of people and over the last 5 years, working with Lucidpress, where I get to work with a lot of marketers like you who are thinking about building their brands. One of the things that I've noticed the last few years is a increase in this willingness to be vulnerable, not only as a person, but as a brand. And you mentioned some of those examples out there. And when I think about that, the power of a brand is really just, it's really about what other people would say about you when you're not in the room. That's like a famous kind of Jeff Bezos quote. Your brand is what other people would say about you. It's really the truth of who you are at your core, either as a person, your personal brand, or as an organization. And I love that you and others are starting to come forth and realize, like, hey, to be truly authentic as a brand, we need to be vulnerable sometimes. We need to say it how we really think it is and what we really believe collectively as a company and as a person. And I think that the benefit of that is that you just create a stronger brand by being true to yourself and being authentic and admitting sometimes that, hey, I don't have it all figured out,
It feels right.
Feels real, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. I love it. So with this idea of imposter syndrome, as your role has grown during your time at the company there, and you moved into this new role as director of marketing, and you still feel this feeling of imposter syndrome sometimes, what have you done to try to overcome some of those feelings?
That's something that I don't even know if I have. I think some days it nags at me more than others. And then really other days where I think it depends on quite a bit. I think it depends, how well did my post do on LinkedIn? What's the feedback from my CEO today? What's the revenue looking like, or this or that? I think depending on that, I tend to take a lot of it either on my shoulders or I pat myself on the back. But when I really feel like an imposter in this industry, I think back to some of my prior experiences in just totally different industries where I walked in and had no experience. Oddly enough, one of them being the culinary industry. I was a line cook. I was a chef for 10 years.
Awesome.
And so, I mean, this is such a pivot for me to be in a role like this, but it was one of those things that I just had to kind of put my head down, stick by what I knew I could do and feel confident in that, and just start getting really comfortable with saying, actually, I don't know that, or I don't know how to do that, or saying, oh, actually, I like your idea better, right? Getting comfortable with, I think, borrowing or finding inspiration elsewhere, and then just sort of telling myself, it struck me that I don't know that anybody actually doesn't feel this way or knows it all. How could they?
Yeah, how could they, right?
So I just kind of feel a bit like amongst my peers in that sense.
Yeah, I love that. I think one thing I've noticed in my career is often many of us start our careers after college and we're hungry and we're ready to go and jump out there in the world. And we think for whatever reason, we have to prove that we are capable and we are smart and we can do it and we know what we're doing. And I think that the further you get in your career, the more you realize, I don't know, know? And I think that the key piece to that is figuring out, what are you good at? What's your lane? What are the things that, like, I feel fairly confident doing based on experience that I have? And what are the things that, like, I just don't know, and I have to rely on other people. And hopefully as a marketing leader, as you're building and growing a team, you are mindful of that so that you can hire people who are much better than you at the lanes that they're great at, and their strengths can support your strengths, and collectively as a team, then you rely on each other and you do something great together.
Yeah. And isn't that funny that we do have a hard time with that, right? And it makes so much sense to hire people better than you. It's something that I really try to practice. And I'll say my company in general does a phenomenal job of that. So there's really great examples of that all around. But Yeah. I mean, that in itself, I think is just, I think that's an old topic that's getting brushed off these days as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I think when it comes to this imposter syndrome too, there's often it comes down to, comparison. Either you're comparing yourself to someone else you see out there and some of the things that they're saying, or you're comparing your brand or your marketing to what other companies are doing out there. As you think about comparison like this, and many of us struggle with that when we have this imposter syndrome, what advice would you give to someone who was kind of in that boat and found themselves kind of comparing either themselves or their marketing and their company's brand to others out there?
Oh God, I'm so bad at this because I pick it apart. I pick our work and our brand apart. And I lust over others' work. Right. I think the biggest thing is that nobody's looking at it as the way that you are. Nobody's scrutinizing it the way that you are. Not to say that there's not scrutiny out there, but you'll make yourself sick almost, I think. So I think it's just finding some moderation of giving yourself healthy critique, and maybe even designing a framework around what am I going to critique myself on, and what standards am I going to meet, and then what do I have to let go a little bit of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's a practice in confidence, and it's a practice. It's truly a practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's definitely something that takes time and effort and consistency to get right. Yeah. I think just to add to what you were saying, I think it's important. One of the things I've realized throughout my career too is how important it is to take enough time to acknowledge the good that's happening, either that you're doing, that your team is doing, that your company is doing, right? Not everything that across our marketing and our brand building is going to be perfect, but not everything's going to be horrible too. Yeah. We might have some good ideas. And so we need to make sure that we share those and we acknowledge those, especially internally with our teams. And then like what you said is, you can draw so much inspiration from others out there. So what are the ideas that other people or other companies are doing great that you want to take and apply and add to what you already have and build upon it? And I think that that's really true wisdom and leadership, is when you can do that without getting stuck in that hole of all the negativity of what's wrong. Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it can be hard to get out of that. I think one of the best feelings for me, because website projects, I think, are my least favorite because they're so lofty and you want them to be everything. And you spend so much time with it. We just completed a website earlier this year that we'd been working on for about 6 months, me and a few other people. And by the time we put it out, like the homepage looked entirely different than what we'd started with and settled on. And I always find myself on the cusp of that I'm about to do that again. Like, just throw it all out, right? Mm-hmm. This one's going to be it. Mm-hmm. But one of the best feelings is that, I was actually in Australia. This was actually right before we all went into lockdown. So really interesting time. But I was in Australia finishing this website, and I was in the office with a bunch of colleagues who aren't on the marketing team, and they would just kind of walk by and see what we were working on. And their reactions were just so uplifting and so what I needed. I don't think they even know how much that sort of positive reinforcement from a team member, somebody just coming by and the sales team being like, I can't wait until that's live. I can't wait to show this to everybody. I was like, oh, here I was almost wanting to show it to nobody. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's just, it puts it in perspective.
Mm-hmm. Love that. So, what I learned from that is just share what you're working on and provide feedback to each other and mm-hmm. share the awesome things that you like about it. Right.
Mm-hmm. And be proud of the work that you do.
Yeah. It's great. I love this. I think this has been an awesome conversation today, Rachael. I really appreciate it. So as we kind of wrap up, how would you kind of summarize what we've talked about today? And second part to that question is, what advice would you give to anyone who's listening who has felt this imposter syndrome? What should they go and do now, right? What would you recommend?
Right. So to sum it up, to start, I think it's so much about acceptance for me. I mean, I wish I could be right about this is absolutely how you generate high quality leads, or this is where you see the most ROI from your marketing campaigns, but I'm not there yet. And honestly, I don't know if anyone really can be like truly empirically there.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that I'm not doing my job. Like, I'm doing my job, and you're doing your job. There are plenty of marketers out in our space that don't know that answer. And I think that's fine. I think I've realized that marketing at its core really relies on human behavior, which you can't formulate that with 100% accuracy. So it's really learning to work with guesswork. And that takes bravery, that takes courage. I mean, our jobs really, the nature of marketing requires that your work is like big and loud and promoted and out there and like on display for everybody to see. And that, I mean, can be exhausting every day, especially when you're putting something out and you don't know what the result is. There's not that accurate of I mean, I know we apply science to it, but there's really not that accurate of a science to how people are going to respond to something. But I would say that if you find yourself in this role, it's because you inspire people around you. And that's why you're in a role like that. So that, I think, is just condolence enough.
Love that. So what I'm hearing you say, just to kind of reiterate, is acknowledge that you're not alone. Many of us, if not most of us, feel this imposter syndrome. 2 is just recognize the good that you are doing and the strengths that you have. And 3, I think, be able to recognize where you need help or improvement and be okay asking for that. You're not going to be perfect at everything, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that you're not doing your job well, right?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of our sales team, our executives on the sales team, have been in marketing roles. I mean, CMO roles, right? They come in and they could be my boss, and they have all the credentials to do so, but they're not. And I realize that because our target market is CMOs, it almost makes a little bit more sense to have them in a sales position. But I go to these people every day. I see myself so much as an extension of the sales team anyway. But I mean, I just realized, I was like, you need to drop any sort of ego or any sort of shame surrounding that, because that would be the biggest thing to hold me back. And I get so far actively seeking knowledge and advice and ideas and inspiration from everybody around me, not just my immediate mentors and bosses, not just the people that have the resume that I aspire to have. Like, I mean, everyone. And it works.
That's awesome. I love that. So again, kind of second part to that question, I think that's an excellent summary. What's the one thing that you'd recommend people go and do to try to mitigate and apply some of the things we've talked about today?
I think a lot of it has to do with having a conversation with yourself, right? Starting out with that. Be honest about your weaknesses, but also be honest about your strengths. Don't give yourself too much of a hard time. And then, learn from everybody that you can around you, seek that out. And then I think, keep your mind open to seeking inspiration outside of the workplace. One thing that I do is I actually will actively try to look up brands that are not in our space at all. B2C brands. Some of the biggest inspiration that I've had has come from like Chobani and like a cookware brand, right? I mean, absolutely nothing to do. But sometimes it's the kickstart you need, right? And feel free to, I think, run with that. I don't know.
Excellent advice.
It's tricky. It's a tricky thing to overcome. I think it's like I said, it's a practice, it's work every day. It's mindfulness.
Yeah, it's great. I love that. I think it's great advice. Excellent place to start. So Rachael, again, thank you so much for taking the time to be on this episode today and, being vulnerable and talking about a topic that many of us feel but don't often talk about. I really appreciate it. I think that there was a ton of value in this episode today. So again, thank you so much. As we wrap up here, if there are listeners that want to get in touch with you or have follow-up questions, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Right. So email's great. That's rferranti@ssgcorp.com. I'm assuming my last name will be somewhere in this that people can
We'll put
find
it
it
on
to
the
spell.
page.
Okay.
Yep, they'll be able to see.
And then, LinkedIn as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Rachael. Hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Garrett.
Talk to you
It's been
later.
a pleasure.